Patients just weren't getting better. I was giving them medicine and then medicine to treat the side effects of the medicines I was giving them. When I discovered lifestyle medicine, I discovered there's a better way.
I'm someone who's been working on trying to make America healthy for 20 years.
The problem is, how do we do that education? We've got direct-to-consumer advertising for pharmaceuticals, big food pushing products that they know are addicting. Where's the money going to come from? How are we going to get that other message out there?
Welcome back to the Marian Flaxman Network Podcast, a podcast dedicated to reintroducing personal narratives into critical public health topics. On today's episode, my conversation with Dr. Brad Moore. Dr. Moore was a practicing clinician who began to feel frustrated that his patients were not getting better after being given traditional Western medicine advice and medications. He became curious about the role of diet, exercise, and lifestyle in general in their disease and healing potential. Now Dr. Moore is the head of lifestyle medicine at George Washington University School of Medicine, and he and I met on Capitol Hill while advocating for food as medicine policies. In this conversation, Dr. Moore and I cover many critical topics in public health, including the intersection of nutrition and medicine, and all of the ways that lifestyle contributes to someone's disease and healing potential. We also ask my favorite question: what is the role of diagnosis in health and healing? Is diagnosing numerous different illnesses really important to the healing process? Or is it more important to find the root cause and the lifestyle and diet changes that promote healing and wellness overall? Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Brad Moore. Brad, Dr. Moore, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. And just from down the road, we're basically neighbors. So it's a quick trip to get to the studio.
I almost walked. If I wasn't running late, I would have walked over.
Next time. So I want to get started and jump right into understanding. Did you always know that you wanted to be a doctor? And if not, what were you interested in doing initially?
I didn't always know. I early on wanted to be a teacher. I always loved biology, and I thought I would teach, high school biology. And then as I went through my training, I realized I wouldn't be able to really teach the interesting stuff. I always said it would be sort of like loving Shakespeare and having to teach English as a second language. So as I pursued my biology studies, you face that fork in the road of PhD versus something else. And I really like to teach, and I thought I would eventually do some research. And so I ended up going to medical school thinking I'd mostly be a PhD researcher or an MD researcher.
Mm-hmm.
And until I spent time with patients and realized that that's what I really loved, and that combined my love of teaching with my love of science.
Yeah, and it's funny because as you were saying you wanted to be a teacher, I was thinking, well, you are getting to do that in so many different ways, which of course we'll get into. But I'm also curious, did you have a really excellent biology or science teacher, or do you know what drove your initial interest in the sciences?
I definitely had an excellent high school biology teacher. First teacher that really didn't just have you memorize things.
Mm-hmm.
He really wanted you to understand why they worked. And he'd say, put your pencils down, give me your heads. I want you to think through this.
Wow.
And that made a big impression.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like so few people get that kind of teaching experience. It's very rare, especially in high school, to have that.
Yeah, he was remarkable.
That's awesome. Okay, so this initial positive experience with science and with being allowed to be curious and think for yourself within this biology classroom drove that interest. And then you're contemplating PhD, MD, research, and you're spending time with patients and you find a passion for it.
Yeah, the first 2 years of medical school, it's just so much learning. I mean, it's trying to drink from a fire hose.
Mm-hmm.
And I really questioned whether or not I made the right decision. Like, what have I done? until I got with patients and really liked that and found that I was good at it. And that really drove the rest of my career.
Yeah. So I know a little bit from speaking with you previously, but I would love to hear from you now how your interactions with patients and how both you teaching them and maybe them teaching you led to your interest in not only medicine, but then eventually what you now teach and practice, which is lifestyle medicine.
So, I came to lifestyle medicine relatively late into my career. I've been practicing at GW for 30 years. And, I got into lifestyle medicine maybe 6 years ago. Um, but I was always interested in prevention. And so that was always a big part of my discussion with patients. But what I found was that in practicing medicine and dealing with the chronic diseases that we deal with, patients just weren't getting better. We were giving them, I was giving them medicine and then more medicine for the same problem, and then medicine to treat the side effects of the medicines I was giving them. And it was draining and it was exhausting. And when I discovered lifestyle medicine, I discovered there's a better way.
And how did you first discover it?
So, like most people, I think I have a personal story and then a professional story. And the personal story was discovering the power of exercise and physical activity in my own life. When I was a kid, I had bad asthma. I had asthma before they discovered inhalers for asthma. So I was not an athlete. I was not able to be an athlete as a kid. And, there's a point in my life 10, 15 years ago where I was, just really facing some challenges, personal challenges. And I discovered running and became a runner. And it just was so powerfully transformative for me that my first interest in lifestyle was, okay, I got to help my patients have this same aha moment and figure out how to make it easier for them. And so that was my first interest. I started collaborating with a PhD social scientist, an applied psychologist at GW on research about how to motivate people to be more physically active. I think as doctors, we were always good at scaring people into it, and that got them to do it for a little while, but
Hmm.
it didn't persist. So my research with her has been around how do you have patients reframe their thinking about exercise so it's something that they don't just do for a little while, but it becomes part of their life.
And what have you found? I mean, are there any tidbits of wisdom that you can kind of share from that investigation?
It's really all about having them find internal motivation. So
Mm,
many of the things that we employ are external motivators. Um, if you don't do this, your blood pressure is going to go up, or you're going to have worse heart disease, or you need to do this because of your weight. And really shifting it to something more immediate than sort of those delayed health outcomes. Like, how do you feel after you exercise? Really focusing on that. Um, and really having it become part of who they are. If they do it because it makes them feel good, and if they do it because it's just who I am, that's sustainable. And
yeah.
so helping people reframe things that way.
Yeah, and I can personally deeply relate to that. I feel like, well, for me, I think another thing that I would add to that, I don't know if this, bears out in the research, but is reframing exercise as joy and not punishment. Because there's been so much of like, you know, oh, you overate, like you had too many calories, so you should go for a run, punish yourself or, work it off or, a lot of like negative languaging around it, as opposed to like fuel yourself so you can move your body and enjoy the experience of moving your body through space and time. Like you have a body and you get to use it. And that's actually really fun. And then that identity piece, like I just consider myself someone who values strength. And so let's say I am sick and so I don't go to the gym for a week. There's no part of me that's like, "Oh, no, I fell off the wagon. How am I gonna get back on? Like, maybe I'm not good enough." I don't have any of that because it's just who I am, that I lift weights. The fact that I didn't go for a week has nothing to do with who I am, it was just a circumstance. Easy for me to get back there because it's just who I am. So, um, glad to hear that that plays out in the research as well, but I definitely can relate to that personally.
And you used a certain turn of language that I think is really important. You said, "I get to exercise," not that
Mhm.
I have to exercise. And I
Right.
think really reframing it and thinking about it that way is very powerful.
Yeah, another thing I'd add to that is having kids. I see how fun movement is for them. When you just watch children play, they love to move their bodies around and climb. And my kids think I'm fun because I'm the mom at the park that's climbing the structures with them and doing pull-ups and hanging from the monkey bars, and they think that's really, really fun. So it's part of the way that I enjoy my experience of parenting and of being a mother and a person in the world is that I can move my body. And of course, like, it is a privilege to have an able body that can do those things. So to really lean into it and enjoy it for me is a very pleasurable experience.
Well, and finding a way to make it fun, I think, is key too.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally recommend like monkey bars, like, I don't know, like you have found joy in running. Are you a distance runner? Do you like to do sprints? Like, what's your vibe?
I'm a distance runner. I mean, at my age, I kind of top out around 10 miles.
That's a lot of
Those are
miles.
my long races. I think I
Yeah.
want to work up to a half marathon, but I don't see a need to go beyond that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, for those of us who are not distance runners, 10 miles, that's the most miles I've ever run. I ran 10 miles like once and I was like, all right, check that box. We're good to go. Back to the weights. But that's awesome. And do you feel like you hear a lot of runners say like it clears their head. Do you feel that way? Like, is it a time to process, or what part of running do you like the most?
And everybody, well, a lot of people I talk to about running, they say that, it's just so uncomfortable. And, the first mile is always hard. And I still feel that way.
Yeah.
What I like the most is how I feel immediately after.
Mm-hmm.
And you do sort of get into a flow in a longer run, which is really nice. But the feeling afterward, the feeling of accomplishment, the feeling that you can do hard things and
Yeah.
push through hard things. And I think that's extended into other parts of my life.
Yes. I was just having this conversation that this sort of knowledge that you gain from running, which is that the first mile lies. The first mile is a liar. It'll tell you that you can't do it and that you suck and that you're the worst and that you're not as conditioned as you thought. That's a lie. And if you're willing to just bear through that, that you'll find a better truth on the other side. That is something that any of us who have run for any more than a mile have learned, but it's so easily applicable to every other area of your life. I mean, I know for myself, just exercise, not running necessarily, but being willing to do a difficult thing. Frankly, giving birth also was a big learning experience for me, knowing that there's this challenging thing, but on the other side of it is something very beautiful, and trusting in yourself to be able to get through that difficulty, to enjoy that beauty on the other side. It's a very important human learning experience because we're all going to face challenges. That's just life.
Exactly.
So, another thing that I find interesting about exercise, and I'm thinking that maybe you'll have a story here as well, is that if you get into exercise kind of before healthy eating, you begin to realize that you're demanding a lot from your body. So you kind of have to feed it better. It's not really true that, oh, now you're running a lot, so you can just eat all the candy you want because you're quote unquote burning it off. Like, the more we ask of our bodies in the gym around the streets, the better we need to fuel. So did your journey into running then nudge you towards healthier eating as well?
Maybe a little bit. It wasn't the big push. I mean, we were always pretty healthy eaters in our home. I grew up in central Pennsylvania, so meat and potatoes. When I got married, my wife taught me that meat is a side dish. Think of it as a condiment, and fill the plate with potatoes or not potatoes, vegetables and things like that. Um, and that's really the way I was already eating when I got into running. what moved me more toward being predominantly plant-based was the science. Although there's a funny story about how I experienced that and how I came to understand that. I was going to a preventive medicine meeting and I heard one of the luminaries in the lifestyle medicine space talking about food as medicine. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought he must be some sort of a snake oil salesman who's just, selling this bill of goods, because how could I at that point be practicing medicine for 20 years and not know this? So I walked out of there very skeptical. But he had put a lot of references on his slides. And, being an academic general internist, I went to the literature and started looking at it. And I was really just shocked about how much research there is supporting the power of a plant predominant diet to influence chronic disease, not only in prevention, but treatment and, dare we even say it, disease reversal. Um, and uh, and so that's when I really started changing my own diet and really wanting to learn more about lifestyle medicine as a discipline. That's really when I started thinking about getting board certified.
Awesome. And what was that process like? So you said that you got into lifestyle medicine like 6 years ago, and of course now you're teaching lifestyle medicine and you're heavily involved. So what was that transition like? How did you have to go to your colleagues and say, "Hey guys, listen, like I'm going to shake things up. I'm going to do things a little bit differently." Or were you able to sort of smoothly just kind of shift the way you were practicing?
I really just started to do it in my own practice with my own patients. And when I started to see successes there, I shared them with my colleagues and they started sending me some of their patients. And that's really how it took off.
Do you worry at all about the proliferation of like ultra processed junk foods that masquerade with the sort of greenwash, this is based in plants messaging on it? Because I would say that my read of a lot of the literature is the power of whole plants, right? And largely that's connected to the power of plant fibers and polyphenols and their interaction with the gut microbiome, and the fact that the average American diet has like 5 grams of fiber when it should have like more like 50. And, how do we get people from 5 to 50? Plants play a huge role in that. And there's so many health benefits of this complex, multicolored, multifaceted, robust, hearty, whole food plant diet, and yet a lot of people now are marketing very heavily and saying things like, "Well, Oreos are vegan," you know? Like, does that trouble you at all?
Oh, tremendously. I mean, what I've come to realize since working in this space is the power of industry to influence how we think and what we do, not just as a consumer with the food industry, but really the way I was trained in medical school. I really think the influence of the pharmaceutical industry in just the way we think about disease. And if all you have is drugs, or if what you learn about mostly is drugs, that's what you reach for first. And there is no industry pushing the power of whole plant foods to influence a medical school curriculum or really the food industry.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think I should probably be broccoli's first lobbyist. I think broccoli needs me in her
We need a
corner.
big broccoli.
I am big broccoli coming at ya. We had an amazing broccoli last night from our CSA share. And this is like, when it comes to diet and food as medicine and food quality, diet quality, there's really like a slippery slope rabbit hole that you can find yourself down that makes you sound like an alien, that the average person who's like going to the grocery store and buying, I don't know, canned soup or packets of soup and thinking, well, this seems low fat, so I guess that's good. Once you start getting deeply into the nuance in, where your produce comes from and what kind of soil it was grown in, and how a bag of frozen broccoli, even organic, that you boil in a pot of water is not the same experience. Leaving aside the nutritional value, which may or may not be comparable, it's not the same experience as broccoli that your farmer down the way grew organically in nutrient-rich, healthy microbiome, healthy soil. That's, like this broccoli we had last night, okay? I'm just gonna, praise this broccoli. It comes from Lancaster Farm Fresh, CSA share, which we get to pick up in our neighborhood. It's incredible, and these farmers in Pennsylvania are doing great things. It's all organic. This broccoli is, 7 different colors. Like, the bottom is a light green, and then it goes up the stem, and it's a dark green, and then the crowns have, a purple and
Mhm.
almost like a blue, and then this very, very dark green. And when you steam it, it's not mushy, it's tender, it's almost meaty, like, there's a hardiness to it that you're not gonna get from a regular store-bought broccoli. And so, I mean, literally last night for dinner, I steamed broccoli. I also made these curried lentils and these dosa pancakes and whatever. It was a great meal, actually, but my kids are just eating plain steamed broccoli. I don't have to put cheesy sauce on it or whatever people think you have to do to make broccoli good for kids. Like, this beautiful CSA share organic broccoli, it's like a world of its own, you know? But that's not when you're getting a person to eat broccoli for the first time, they're usually not finding that broccoli, which is a shame because it's the best broccoli ever. But it's gonna take a lot, I think, to get, first of all, people eating broccoli, right? And excited about broccoli, and then to help them to understand the benefits of, local, fresh, seasonal eating, which go beyond just the benefits of plants.
I think the same is true of fruit. I grew up in Pennsylvania and, we got our stone fruit from the orchards and our apples from the orchards. And, people say that they don't like fruit. And if you've just bought what you can easily get at a supermarket, I can understand why.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah,
So,
there's nothing worse than an unripe pear off a buffet table at a conference.
right.
But there's nothing better than a perfect, juicy pear that you've, perfectly let ripen, and it's dripping and it's so flavorful. It's candy. I mean, it just tastes like candy. Okay, well, here I am lobbying for broccoli and pears. So big broccoli is sponsoring this podcast. But I wanna go back a little bit to my earlier question about when you began to practice lifestyle medicine and how your colleagues and peers maybe viewed that. And I'm curious, zooming forward to today and going beyond just your peers, around you and thinking about doctors across America more broadly, what do you think the average doctor still right now really is not understanding about the role that diet could or should be playing in the health outcomes of their patients?
Well, even before you get to the role of diet and lifestyle and outcomes, I think they don't really understand the role of diet and lifestyle in causing chronic disease.
Right.
I think, the Human Genome Project is a wonderful thing, but I think it left um, both the public and the professional community thinking that, genetics plays a bigger role than it really does.
Right.
And, you know, pure pure genetics, what your genes are, determine probably about 20% of your health outcomes. And lifestyle has an epigenetic role in that it turns the genes on and off. So if you have the gene, doesn't mean that you get either the benefit or the downside of this gene unless it's turned on or turned off. And what turns the genes on and off are lifestyle factors. So sleep, diet, exercise being the main ones. And so I think, we're taught as physicians to identify the disease and then look at what patch we can use to make it better. And we really don't think about, well, why are we here? Um, I think it's one of those things where we've moved into modern life, and so many of these lifestyle diseases have just become so common that we think, well, they must be genetic
Right.
because all of our lifestyles have changed together and we don't have the memory of what it was like to live differently.
Right. And I love hearing you say that because I agree. And I think Dr. Mark Hyman says this, although it's probably just a quote that you could attribute to a lot of people, but I've heard him say it that genetics loads the gun and lifestyle pulls the trigger. And I think to me, I feel, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this. I'm a little bit, I hate to say anti, but just to be very simple about it, I'm a little anti-diagnosis because I wonder why we're so obsessed with labeling things before we even tried get all the poisons out, right? So, for example, when I was a kid, I was obese. Uh, Not seriously obese, certainly not by today's standards, but I was 14 years old, I was 5'6", and I was over 200 pounds. So I was big and I was unwell. I didn't feel well. But then everything about my life changed. Okay. I do not feel like a person with obesity who's fighting the great fight against that disease to be here today and be healthy. I feel like that was a way that my body was showing up given a variety of circumstances. Those circumstances no longer being the case, I am not a person with obesity, right? If somebody had diagnosed me at that age and said, this is a disease that you have that you'll be fighting for the rest of your life, I think I would think about my life quite differently. And in my opinion, not better, right? Similarly, I've been covered in eczema at certain points in my life. I do not think of myself as someone who has eczema and is battling the disease of eczema. I think of myself as someone who is prone to skin manifestations of inflammation under certain chronic stress conditions, whether they be diet, lifestyle, etc., perhaps chemical, environmental. And so, again, if somebody had diagnosed me with eczema and told me, you have eczema, you'll be battling it for the rest of your life, I would think about my health and my body very differently. And I enjoy the way I think about my health and body, which is to say, a doctor a couple days ago said to me, "Do you have any chronic illnesses?" And I said, "No, I'm sensitive. I'm a sensitive person, but I do not have a single diagnosed chronic disease." And that's how I feel. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, like diagnosis versus reframing. Do you think there's power in one or the other or both?
Well, I think what you've described is a paradigm shift that we need in medicine. Um, you know, if your focus is on treatment, diagnosis is an important part, an important prior step to know how to treat something. But if your focus is on finding the root cause and, changing the factors that are leading to that condition or diagnosis, then then you're right. Really, just looking at optimizing health factors is more important than and really more effective than trying to diagnose and treat specific manifestations of an unhealthy lifestyle.
Right. And obviously, diagnoses are critical for billing. And as we kind of shift into this conversation about food as medicine as a policy conversation and as a healthcare conversation, being able to decide which diagnoses qualify for a food as medicine prescription is an important part of that picture. Although, out in Alameda County, California, they've decided that if you are food insecure, that qualifies you for a food as medicine prescription. So that's kind of awesome and very inclusive and a very open diagnostic criteria for that prescription. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess it's interesting because I think so much around diagnosis and the word cure. You kind of hesitated. Dare we say cure? But am I someone who cured my obesity? I mean, trust me, I couldn't be obese now. I don't have the appetite for it. I don't have the ability. Like it would be very, very uncomfortable for me to attempt to regain that weight. I don't know how I would do it. And it's been, more than 20 plus years since I've ever struggled with my weight. So it's like, it's just not, it's not a true thing that I have obesity and I'm fighting against it. But did I cure it? Or is it just that the disease was the lifestyle, and once the lifestyle resolved, the disease didn't exist? I don't know. Just one man's story, you know?
Well, I think that kind of story is powerful, and I think reframing I think as a profession, we have sent the message that we can fix you and you need us to get better. And so patients often give up their own responsibility for their lifestyle. They look for a quick fix. And I think your story can be part of how we move people back to taking responsibility for the choices that they're making that are leading to these chronic diseases. And I think both physicians and patients need to better understand the connection so that we can focus more upstream and keep people healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, speaking of language and sort of the nuance of language and how the way we talk about something may or may not make it different, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the similarities and or differences between what sound to the outside listener like potentially different schools of thought. So, we've got food as medicine slash food is medicine. There's nuance in there as well. We have lifestyle medicine, and then we just have sort of more broadly, maybe like holistic health, right? This idea that there are ways outside of pharmaceuticals to heal and to transform health outcomes. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about whether there are, in your opinion, important differences between those schools or whether the outside listener who's considering this topic of, using food and lifestyle to heal themselves in addition to whatever else, might they conceptualize this as one sort of movement or are there important differences?
I think the terms that you mentioned uh, can really be thought of as one movement. Um, I think in terms of a Venn diagram, right? So, food as medicine is within the circle of lifestyle medicine. Lifestyle medicine is pretty much the same as whole health. The whole idea of, I mean, you didn't ask about integrative medicine
Right, of
and
course.
functional
Yes.
medicine and all of that. Um, that's where the circles don't overlap completely. I think that lifestyle is something that is applicable to everyone, and it is the most upstream of the interventions that we have, and um, it is getting at the root causes. When you start to think about, integrative medicine or functional medicine and supplements, um, that's not that different from the traditional medicine approach, except instead of pharmaceuticals, we're using supplements. And
Right.
so I'm not in any way saying that there's not validity there, but I've really chosen to focus on what is really applicable to absolutely everyone and what I think you want to get right first before you reach for either supplements or pharmaceuticals to deal with the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that is and I totally didn't even think to mention functional medicine because like you say, that is more of a sort of clinical Western approach of you get diagnosed with a symptom and then they look for a specific treatment. It may be more quote unquote natural, it may be a supplement or an herb or a tincture or even a methodology, right? Like, I don't know, oxygen therapy or something along
Mhm,
those
mhm.
lines. But it is more sort of one to one symptom to treatment or blood panel to approach, as opposed to looking at someone's whole life and saying, you're only sleeping 5 hours a night. It looks like you're only getting 15 grams of protein and 3 grams of fiber every day. Your diet has two colors in it, not 20, and maybe you could go for a walk after work, right? Like sort of starting someone on the basics, the things that, as you just said, it's important to kinda get a hold of them maybe before you start tweaking and fine tuning, which is more of the functional medicine and to some extent integrative. I think the term integrative medicine, in my understanding, is, like, so broad. It can mean everything from acupuncture to diet and lifestyle It's really just the integration of different approaches
Right,
within the Western model. So it's extremely broad.
right. Well, I think, the hardest thing is getting a patient to think this is something I can do for myself and this is something that I can control because even with a lot of the alternative medicine and functional medicine, you're going to somebody and getting some intervention done on you.
Right.
It's not something that you need to make a big change. And I think sometimes that mindset change is even harder than the actual changes that you'll make.
Right. Yeah, and what is behind that mindset? I mean, have you seen in your patients, obviously you have your own personal experience, but I'm sure you've seen hundreds or thousands of patients who have gone through different types of changes, maybe some more successfully than others. Has there been a uniting factor in terms of that empowerment piece? Like, what makes one person believe that they can make the change versus another person thinking, I'm just not set up to make this change. It's not going to happen for me, even though you can see as an outsider that they're dealing with the same circumstances as your patient who does feel empowered.
Well, I teach my patients and my students that in order to make meaningful lifestyle change, you need three things. You need the knowledge of what change is going to affect the chronic disease you're thinking about. You need to find your motivation and you need the right attitude. But the hardest thing is you need to figure out how to actually make it work in your life. What are the practical steps to get you from where you are to where you want to be? And I believe strongly that everyone deserves to at least understand that knowledge piece, the connection. I think too often as physicians, we make decisions for our patients about what they would be willing to change. And so we don't even tell them that big change could lead to a bigger positive outcome because we think, oh, they'll never do that. So I think it starts with being clear about what the possibilities are and then helping the patient find their motivation. And that's different for every patient. Some people, a powerful motivator is not wanting to be put on drugs or wanting to get off drugs. Um, that's probably the biggest single motivator that I see in my practice. But, sometimes it's about wanting to, be around longer for grandchildren or something like that. So finding people find their motivation. And then once they're deciding that they're going to make a change and they're motivated, then the process of supporting them through that change is something that has to be done over time. They're going to move in the direction that they want to go. They're going to hit some barriers. They're going to need some help to get around or over those barriers. And we support patients going, as far as they want to.
Right. And I mean, do you think there's any utility or usefulness, perhaps, for some kind of like personality test for patients? Because I think there are different types. Like some people, they need to see a big dramatic result to motivate them. And other people need to really tiptoe into it and go step by step. And it's difficult to know unless the patient is very self aware and you say, hey, listen, are you willing to make this radical diet change, knowing that in 2 weeks you may see much more exciting results than if we just cut this one or two things, or if we reduce the amount of sugar you're consuming over the course of 4 weeks, right? These incremental changes that might be easier to make day to day, but won't give you that same instant gratification feedback. Like, are you able to ask a patient which personality they have, or do you think that there might be some utility in figuring out how to get to know patients better as people, as mindsets before we decide, like you said, like, is this the kind of patient where if I said to them, listen, if you make this radical change for 2 weeks, you're going to be blown away by the results. Are you willing to have two challenging from a habit perspective weeks to see very different results as opposed to, we'll give you something simple to take on over the next few weeks. You may not see dramatic changes, but you'll notice a little bit of a shift. Like, how do you know who's who?
I think you ask them. I often tell people for patients who want to make changes, I see two main types of patients. I see the ones that want to go all in and change everything all at once, and the ones that want to make an incremental change. And, we will support you, whichever choice that you make. There are pros and cons. If you are an all-in person, you're gonna see results much faster, but it's gonna require a bigger change up front. And so we talk about, how far in terms of change do we think you're gonna need to go to get the results you want? And then you can decide, can I go there quickly or do I need to go there more slowly? And sometimes people will start down the path of incremental change and have successes and then say, "Oh heck, I'm just going to go all in from here." So it's not always an either or.
Yeah. And I've heard from a lot of people who are sort of thinking about healthy eating that one of the biggest factors that gets in their way is that they don't know how to cook and they're afraid that they are uniquely bad at cooking. And so I want to ask you, in your journey to becoming a different type of eater and experimenting in the kitchen, would you be willing to share if you have any flops that you experienced, any times that you went out on a limb and tried something different and it didn't work out, but you got back on the horse?
Well, my wife was very clear when I went down this path that if you're going to expect your patients to change the way they're eating, you need to know how to cook what you're asking them to eat. So I definitely made that a priority. Um, And, being a scientist and having taken organic chemistry, I'm pretty good at following recipes, so I haven't had that many flops, but I did, try to make a really delicious gazpacho once and, left it in the blender too long and ended up with what I can only describe as a gazpacho whip.
That
Um,
sounds good.
yeah, no, it really wasn't.
A gazpacho and, like, maybe, like, a hot gazpacho whip because those blenders over time, they will start to kinda heat up what's inside of them as
Right,
well.
right, so that was
Gazpacho
lesson
whip.
learned.
Yeah, okay, alright, good to know, good to know. Yeah, I think, I try to always tell people, like, it may not be the recipe's fault, or it may not be your fault, it may be the recipe's fault because people think that recipes are just awesome, and these days you can kind of see a little bit closer to reality because there are ways to rate a recipe online, so if you see a recipe and it only has, like, 4 stars, maybe there's some issues with it. You can read the comments below, like, did it have too much salt or not enough baking powder or whatever it was. But in the past, like, if you had a cookbook and it said bake at 350 for an hour and you did that and your thing was sinking in the middle, you'd think, oh, I'm just a terrible cook. But it could be the climate. It could be that you didn't quite measure your flour the way that they wanted you to. Your oven could be different. There's just so many different factors. So I'm always like, telling people, don't give up on yourself in the kitchen because there are so many ways to make mistakes and for a recipe to go wrong and it's not your fault. And the more mistakes you make, the better you're going to get.
Well, and if you like to cook and you're a foodie, there are some amazing plant-based recipes that, are complicated, but just are amazing. But I don't want patients to think that it has to be that way.
Right.
It can really be very simple. One of my favorite meals is to steam a sweet potato, steam some kale, and then have some seasoned beans that I made and put that over both of them. And it takes 15 minutes and it's delicious and satisfying and, you don't need a recipe.
Yeah. When my daughter was little, my first daughter, for breakfast every day, we ate like a baked sweet potato with avocado and sea salt. And it's the most delicious combination. And people, because I've worked as a chef and I love food and I love to cook and I love to make recipes, but what my life looks like day to day is like last night. There was lentils, there was roasted sweet potatoes, right? There's usually like a fish or a grass-fed steak, or there's, some protein in there. And then it's so simple that I think most people are very disappointed to hear about what I'm eating because they're like, well, what do you eat? I'm like, roasted sweet potatoes, steamed broccoli, wild salmon, maybe some rice, maybe some beans, depending on the day. I love lentils, they're my favorite legume. But yeah, it's like it can be very delicious and flavorful and tasty, and especially if you spice the beans or the lentils,
Mhm.
it doesn't need to take hours. It can be quick, it can be easy, it can be very fast. People say, "Oh, I have to go get fast food because I don't have time." You buy a Instapot. They're very useful.
Absolutely.
and it's the gift that keeps on giving. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, you got an MPH way before it was cool, which I say because MPH is kind of a hot degree now, and COVID made public health a buzzword. And, I love public health and we love talking about it here on the podcast, but it wasn't necessarily a buzzword or a thing that the average doctor was considering getting back when you did that. So, talk to me about your interest in public health and what drove that.
So I got my MPH in 1995. I graduated from medical school in 1989 and did my primary care internal medicine training at Hahnemann University in Philadelphia. And then I was chief resident um, in medicine, and I was the chief academic house officer for the university, which meant that I sat on the board of trustees for the hospital. And it was that experience of seeing, in medical school, you learn medicine, which is basically how to treat an individual patient. But that really gave me a view into the bigger issues of healthcare and how does the system work or not work. And that was really what made me interested in learning public health, was to understand more about the system. My concentration was in healthcare management and policy. I joke that I did enough healthcare management to cure me of it. It was something that I was good at, but it wasn't my thing. I didn't love it. And I did some health policy early on, and until I became a little bit jaded by the fact that you can have the best health policy in the world, but if the health politics don't line up, it's not going anywhere. And I still think it's important to be involved in policy, but I really just chose to focus on my patients and education and teaching other doctors. That was an area where I felt I could have the biggest influence.
Yeah. And of course, you and I met being involved in health policy. We were doing an advocacy day for food as medicine policy on Capitol Hill. And I'm very passionate about policy, but I think that, there's this slide occurring right now, or, barriers breaking down between what do we call health policy? Where does it end? And where does social policy begin? Public health framework, the social determinants of health show us that it's not just genetics or contagious disease that's impacting someone's day-to-day health outcomes. It's their housing security, it's their access to food, it's their stress levels, it's their ability to go for a walk after a meal. Is their neighborhood a safe, comfortable place to take
Mm-hmm.
that post-meal stroll to keep their blood sugar down or even? So these social determinants, where does health policy end? Where does social policy begin? Where does food policy begin? And health policy end? So how do you think we could or should, as a society, as a policy landscape, how could we rethink these borders? Like, should there be fewer borders, or should we just be sort of integrating the conversations?
I think, often if the medical community tries to implement some policy that restricts choices. I think of, the time where they, in New York City, tried to do away with supersizing of soft drinks and things like that. And there was a lot of pushback from the public. I think the step that's missing there is we need to make that connection between those lifestyle choices and chronic disease for people to be open to us engaging in that sphere. And we have not done a good job educating either politicians or the public about how much those lifestyle choices around diet and movement and sleep and managing stress really lead to these chronic diseases that we're dealing with. And I think that understanding needs to be much more prevalent before people are going to be more open to us implementing policies that would shape those choices.
Right. And I wonder, it's sort of a chicken or the egg problem, right? Like, does the public need to demand these changes, which then, to some extent, makes the policy change unnecessary or at least precedes that policy change and makes the policy change less regulatory on the consumer side and more regulatory on the producer side? Or, is there a role for policy to lead the way as a consumer educator, as a sort of forced behavior change to help people understand the negative unintended consequences of their habits that they just maybe we could never possibly reach them quickly or effectively enough, So I'm thinking right now about this sort of confusing conversation that's happening in politics about, make America healthy. And I'm someone who's been working on trying to make America healthy for 20 years. And, you are as well. I'm also someone who has not. So, for example, there's been this talk about boycotting Kellogg's, right? And having policies in place to make certain additives in children's cereal illegal. And I'm a fan of that. I think there should not be artificial flavors and colors and so much sugar and ultra processed foods marketed towards children. I'm a huge fan of curtailing marketing of sugary ultra processed products. I think there shouldn't be food marketing to children. But that, I think, makes me like a crazy lefty, right? And that I want that much government oversight on free speech. I mean, I think Tony the Tiger would say he's allowed to say whatever he wants about his sugary
Right.
cereal. That's the American way. So to me, it's fascinating because I believe that there should not be all these junk products fed to children. So guess what? I don't feed them to my children. And I teach my children, and I have for, well, my oldest is 18, so 18 years, that those products are poisonous, that they're actively poisonous, and that you should not consume them. And I've explained to them why. I've showed them the research. We talk about it. And I've voted with my dollar every day for 20 years. I don't purchase things with food coloring. I don't purchase ultra processed junk foods. I don't purchase things with cartoon characters on them. That's my choice as an American, and I've done it. I haven't been really waiting for the government to mandate that it's not allowed, even though, again, as a maybe rabid leftist, I'm not sure, I think that that would be okay to have those regulations. But now we're seeing it come in this weird, confusing way, right? Like people on the right are saying we need to step in and have all these changes and all these regulations and make these things illegal. Do you think that, first of all, does this shock you? Is it a shocking sort of political and policy conversation to you, or do you think it's just a normal evolution of feelings? So that's question one. And then question two is, do you think we need the regulations to lead, or could the regulations very easily follow enough people purchasing organic rolled oats instead of Fruit Loops?
So I'm going to answer question two first
Okay.
because, I think we're having a political moment right now where it's pretty clear that the majority of Americans don't want a lot of government regulation around these things. I think really educating the public and having the public demand the change is going to be more effective in the long run. You know, there's a lot. The problem is, how do we do that education? We've got direct to consumer advertising for pharmaceuticals. We've got, big food pushing products that they know are addicting just to push sales. Where's the money going to come from or how are we going to get that other message out there? And I think that's the real thing we need to try to focus on. It's happening at a grassroots level, but how do we really expand that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm currently a volunteer lobbyist for Big Broccoli, and no one has reached out about paying me for it. So I think we do need to answer this question. How will Big Broccoli fund my lobbying efforts? Because volunteer lobbying only lasts so long. Okay. You currently work not only as a doctor with patients, but also as an educator, teaching lifestyle medicine to medical students, and then also as an advocate. You live outside of DC, you visit Capitol Hill, you educate citizens, politicians, policymakers. So you're doing it all. You're living the dream because you're getting to teach as well as practice. So I want to hear a bit more about that. First of all, your medical students. Are they coming to you because they've decided up front, we want to learn lifestyle medicine, or is it just part of their general rotation? Like, is the average medical student coming through GW getting a taste of lifestyle medicine?
So I'm going to back up and say that I am not primarily teaching medical students. I'm teaching
Ah,
medical residents.
okay.
So these are the people who have graduated from medical school and are pursuing their advanced training. And really the reasons for that are just practical. You know, in my career at GW, I do most of my teaching in the graduate medical education space. And so that's where I had kind of the most influence to affect policy. And as I realized how important and how powerful lifestyle medicine was, I wanted to figure out how to expand it at GW and just really weave it into the fabric of the way we think about health at our institution. And I think learners are a great way to do that. So we created a lifestyle medicine pathway within our internal medicine training program where incoming residents can choose to follow that pathway, and then when they finish their 3 years of training, they're board eligible in internal medicine and in lifestyle medicine. So really, I was surprised that about a third of the incoming class applied for and are participating at some level in that pathway. Um, there's a lot of interest among younger physicians. They seem to get this more intrinsically than those of us who trained a while ago. And so it's definitely growing among the residents and the graduate medical education space at GW. There is a culinary medicine program at GW that the undergraduates, some of the undergraduates are able to participate in, and that's a terrific program. Um, the students actually have reached out and formed a lifestyle medicine interest group just this year at GW to organize students to learn more about lifestyle medicine. And their goal is to educate their peers, to reach out to the community and educate the public. And also, their stated goal is to help bring it into the medical school curriculum more. So um, I think it's permeating all layers of education at GW, and some of it's grassroots with the students.
That's so awesome. I am curious also. So, we always hear this kind of ironic thing in our culture that doctors, unfortunately, do not get to live very healthy lifestyles, especially med school students and residents. They're working 90 hours a week, or they're not sleeping. They're on call late into the night. They're living out of vending machines. I read this book, When Breath Becomes Air, and it details the life of a medical resident who, well, I won't spoil the ending, but the way that he was talking about how he ate and slept or didn't sleep during his time as a resident was shocking, even though, of course, I had heard that it's a very difficult time. Within lifestyle medicine, because it's not just food as medicine or integrative medicine, but it's really acknowledging the role of this whole lifestyle in a person's health, is there a advancing of the conversation of how we can support medical students, residents, and doctors in being able to practice what they preach when it comes to living a healthy lifestyle? I mean, if we know that sleep is the cornerstone of a healthy life, how are we enabling our lifestyle medicine practitioners to lead by example?
Well, one of the main tenets of lifestyle medicine is that you really need to practice it in yourself first to really help your patients. And we know that from research that people who practice either good sleep, physical activity, healthy eating in their own life are not only more comfortable and more likely to discuss it with their patients, they're going to have the practical knowledge to actually help their patients make those changes. So, we definitely take a put your own oxygen mask on first attitude in our program. Um, there are some realities of medical training that have definitely improved over the years in terms of work hour restrictions and things like that, but it is still challenging, I think, to hit all of the six pillars of lifestyle medicine in your life as a medical student. But I think we are increasingly trying to facilitate that. We have a Center for Wellness for all of our house staff and our students that can support them in those ways as well.
That's awesome. Okay, so I feel like we've talked about a lot today. We've covered a lot of ground, and I really, really appreciate you for sharing everything that you've shared and for the work that you're doing. I just want to ask a final question, which is given everything and all the responsibilities and how much work everything is and how chaotic the world is and how many different directions a person could be pulled, what keeps you engaged? What really keeps you focused on this work, showing up every day for not just your patients and your residents, but also for advocacy work and staying engaged in your community? Like what really drives you?
It's really my patients and seeing the power of lifestyle change, seeing how patients can make changes that I never thought that they could if they're properly supported, and then seeing how that changes their lives. Um, Being able to take patients off of medicine and just seeing how much better they feel and how joyful they are about it. I mean, I've had patients in tears. They're just so happy um, that they're doing better and that they found a program that will support them in this approach, and that's what keeps me going. I really feel right now lifestyle medicine is a specialty, and I'd like to work where it doesn't need to be a specialty anymore. I think really it just needs to be the foundation of medicine. And that's what keeps me working in the education space and in the advocacy space.
That's awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for all of your work at every level. And I'm with you. I think that lifestyle medicine is just the foundation of a healthy life. And here's hoping that in the next 5 to 10 years, we kind of reframe the entire medical approach to have lifestyle medicine at the base of that pyramid.
I couldn't agree more.
And thank you for joining me today. It's really been amazing to speak with you.
It's been a great time.
Thank you once again for listening to the Marian Flaxman Network Podcast, a podcast dedicated to reintroducing personal narratives into critical public health topics. For more information on me, Marian, please visit my website at marianflaxman.com. For more information on my guest, Dr. Brad Moore, and his work in lifestyle medicine at George Washington University School of Medicine, please find the links in the show notes. Please know that the views expressed in this podcast are not an official representation of the views of our affiliated institutions, including Cornell University and George Washington University School of Medicine. This episode was produced by Brain Trust Productions and sponsored by Informed Solutions Consulting. Thank you so much once again for listening, and we will see you next time.